Hey everyone, you guys ready for the last stage in the three-stage model in this class for helping skills? The action stage. So in the action stage, obviously we've spent time exploring issues with clients. We have spent time delving into insights, helping clients try to understand their issues more fully. And now we're at the point where clients are ready to explore changes. It's really important to get to this process with clients because it helps solidify insights. So maybe they've thought about things differently and it's ready to enact that change in their life. And also that's why they're coming to you in the first place in most cases. You know, we have talked about that some clients just want to explore and talk, and that's fine. That's really great. But there are a lot of clients who really come for help because they want to see something different in their life. So we're getting to that part of things. Now there are different ways and different types of changes that can happen. Sometimes you could do one of these or all three of these. But the first is helping clients in changes with thoughts. An example of that is helping a client reduce negative self-talk. Catching some of those automatic thoughts. I know that I've had you guys write about, toxic thoughts that you might have, and toxic thoughts can really get in the way of our lives. So helping clients change some of that toxic thinking. Feelings. Feelings are, we can't necessarily change how we feel, but we can learn to manage those feelings by learning to express them in safe outlets. Or redirect feelings, or maybe if we understand where those feelings come from, we can start to have other feelings about things. But yeah, work with feelings or work with behaviors. So, for example, if a client is self-harming, we really want to try to enact changes where they stop doing that. Or maybe, another type of behavior is relational boundaries. How are we help clients develop more healthy relational boundaries so they're not always ending up stressed out in their relationship. So regardless, we're talking about change here, people. And a really important thing to note, that the action stage can become a lot more direct and directive than the other stages. We've really tried to take the back seat. And we want to continue to empower clients to be autonomous, but we also don't want to just tell them what to do. So remember that we're really trying to be like a coach. We're trying to guide them along, support them, and encourage them. We're not trying to just give them advice, and we're not trying to just fix them. You can't really fix anybody. That doesn't really happen. So we're working alongside our clients to move toward change, and I like to think of the very classic ancient proverb, if you give a man a fish, he will eat for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he will eat for a lifetime. So we're really trying to actually teach clients about how they think, about relationships, teach them to think about the world differently so that they can make different choices. If you just tell someone to stop an unhelpful behavior, they won't understand why, and they will more easily go back to it. So again, you want to teach them skills so that they can keep enacting these changes on their own when they're no longer with you as a helper. What will the action stage look like? Well, I quickly wanted to go over just a few different types of clients that are pretty common that will help you know that you need to be in the action stage. The first type of client is the client that goes right to it. You've explored, you've gotten to know them, you've made some insights, and they start to kind of come up with their own game plan. This is the client who's maybe talking about their relationship with their mother, and they realize that they're always trying to fix their mom or keep their mom from making mistakes. Maybe their mom isn't a very responsible human, it happens. And the client then starts to say, well, maybe I should stop giving her advice, or maybe I should stop managing her, or try to tell her what to do, and I just need to go relax and let her do her own thing. That client is going to their own solution, so they're moving on to the action stage on their own. So keep going with them, but help them evaluate the plan that they're coming up with and support them. Maybe they might come up with an action plan that's actually not the best fit, or they haven't thought it all the way through. So you want to evaluate kind of what's coming up and still do a lot of exploring and talking about it, but they're ready to go, they're chomping at the bit, you're ready for the action stage with them. Next is a client who's maybe unsure of where to go or maybe how to get there. So this client has definitely, gained some insights, but they're not totally aware of what they need. So I really liked the example of Margarita from the book. Let's say Margarita goes to work and she is constantly being passed over for promotions because she struggles with self-confidence and she doesn't really present herself in a confidence way so that people notice what she's doing. She could have the insight that she's upset that she's not getting recognized at work, but she might need to gain some awareness and gain some actual skills about how to be more confident. It could be useful to go into some of the emotional background of why she's not confident, but you could also maybe have some teaching of skills of, how to talk to someone, how to make eye contact, how to stand up for yourself in a respectful way. In the action stage, there is a lot more teaching, and sometimes it's teaching of micro skills to support the broader goals. And then another thing that could happen is you might have a client that is aware of the change that would be ideal, but they don't really have the immediate resources to make all the changes that they want to. And that could be physical resources, or it could just be realistic issues. So for example, the book gave of a client who wanted to go to an Ivy League school, realized that, school was really important for them, and they thought that they should go to an Ivy League school for a master's program. Now, if they didn't get good grades in their undergrad, that's probably not going to be realistic. So how do you take their goal of improving their education and work with them to where you find something that's more attainable? So maybe it's going to different types of community programs, gaining skills more slowly, just readjusting their goal to be realistic. Of course, you want to be really cautious with this because we don't want to discourage clients and tell them what is and is not possible, but it's also important to have a sense of realism around this. Another example is sometimes we are in families that are toxic or stressful, and we can't always just leave those families. It can be helpful sometimes to cut off, but they're always going to be your family. So helping individuals deal within their current limitations. One really important thing, well, there are many important things, but one important thing about the action stage is that you really want to avoid the trap of thinking that this is the stage where you fix clients. So a couple tips. First, try not to fixate on the idea that the client must change in a specific way. You remember when we talked about perfectionism and how humans can masturbate and shit on themselves by thinking they must do it this way, they should do it that way. Don't have a set goal of what the client needs to do to change. Rather, explore several options with them, support them, get them to generate ideas. I think at least 3 different ways to go is a good idea. I had a teacher once tell me that 1 isn't a choice, 2 choices can be a trap because it's like, oh, I want you to pick this thing, not that thing, but 3 is a real choice. So explore at least 3 different options with clients. Don't have one in mind because the one that you have in mind might not be the best fit for them. You can always suggest options, but they have to choose what they want to do at the end of the day. And also just remember that small self-care and mindfulness skills go a long way. What do I mean by that? With fixing clients and this idea, you're not going to be able to undo all of the problems they've ever had and all the problems that they will have. But if you can even instill in them any tiny skills to take care of themselves, to have healthier thinking patterns, to have better self-care, more mindful and aware of what's going on in their life, that's really positive. You're not going to fix everything else, but you can help them be more resilient and in tune with themselves so that they can make more empowered choices along the way. So we do not fix clients. Fixing other people isn't a thing. So what are markers for readiness? How do we know that someone is ready for the action stage? There are a couple things. Like we said before, the client is already coming up with ideas for change. You do want to make sure, if this is like one of your earlier times seeing a client and it's clear that there's a lot to explore and they just rush to a solution, you might want to slow that process down. But if you've done your due diligence and you've worked through some exploration and insight work, it's a good time to move forward. Another thing that can maybe lead to working on solutions in the action stage a little quicker is if the client only wants to work on a specific problem and enough info has already been gathered. What's an example of that? Well, sometimes clients come in and they don't really want to or need to do a lot of emotional exploration. They don't really want to talk about their past. They just want a specific thing. Like someone comes and said, hey, I'm stressed. I don't want to talk about the things that are making me stressed. I just want to learn some relaxation techniques. Can you teach those to me? In those cases where a client is really asking you for quickly going to that kind of solution, but they're really not willing to go into their past, or it's not really going to make a huge difference, it can be okay to just kind of go forward and teach them the skills that they want. I, of course, am usually one who tries to get into a client's past and growing self-awareness and that kind of thing. But in certain types of jobs, for example, as a counselor, I get to spend a lot of time with people. But in other types of jobs, like a life coach spends time with people, a social worker might spend time with people. But if you're a case manager, you might have really limited time with people. So sometimes the restraints of your job and what a client wants can mean that you go to a solution faster, though clearly I'm advocating for taking your time. If the client is in crisis, if a client is in any way a danger to themselves or others, you immediately have to act. You kind of skip all the exploration and insight stuff. You have to stabilize that person. Another example is, say someone is coming to you and then suddenly they don't have housing, or they don't have a place to live. You immediately need to attend to that need or try to help them attend to that need before you can really do other kind of emotional stress related work. So crisis trumps everything. And then the last one is the client is stuck in insight but hasn't made moves towards personal change. So someone who keeps saying, I know I need to do this, I know I need to, I keep thinking this way and I realize it's bad for me, but they're still not enacting changes in their life. You want to start working with them for specific goals to actually bring about the change that you guys are discussing. Don't hem-haw about it forever. So another briefly, in the book, they have a section where they talk about cognitive behavioral therapy and operant conditioning, etc. I want you to read all that. I'm not going to go into it here. I did post 2 videos that talk about just 2 different theories of change and 2 different theories about how people work. But I just wanted to highlight that your belief about how change happens will affect your work with clients. And so your beliefs or theories of change are going to come along as you advance in your education. They'll be different depending on what specific field that you go into. But that's actually the discussion topic this week. I wanted to ask you, how do you think that change happens in people? Can people change? What is important to look at? I obviously am someone who's very focused on emotion. I'm focused on attachment, how we connect in relationships. I'm not exactly a behavioralist, but I think that behaviorism has a place and can be really useful for a lot of people with a lot of issues. But I deal with things like grief, so changing behaviors is not always super useful in grief. Processing is important. So the work that you do and the theory that you have about change is going to make a difference in what this work looks like specifically. So let's go into skills. These are not skills that you have to display in this class, but I think these can be interesting, and I hope that they kind of connect to the skills we've already practiced and sort of understanding why we're doing them and how they work. The first is open questions and probes for change. So we're really used to now for the need to ask open-ended questions or open-ended probes to get clients to talk about other things. And so unlike the other stages here, these questions and probes are directed specifically at exploring action. These are intended to guide clients to exploring their options. So this is different from you giving advice. Instead, you're asking open-ended questions, what they've tried, what has worked. And I've actually dinged some of you on doing these too early. So for those of you who like to ask open questions about solutions, this is your time. So here's an example. What kinds of things have you tried so far? A client is talking about a problem of never really studying at a good time and then getting behind in class. So what have you tried so far? What's worked? Or say a client tried a new strategy. Well, how did it work when you tried that? You're getting them to really talk about, evaluate, assess what they've done. What ideas do you have about what to do in this situation? Maybe a client keeps engaging in relationships with partners that just aren't good for them. All the people that they date are jerks, and somehow they keep ending up with jerks. So instead of telling them, maybe you need to date a different kind of person, what ideas do you have? What could you do differently? Or say that there's a new thing that you want them to try or think could be good, but instead of telling them what to do, you might ask them to think what that'd be like. So what might happen if you tried that? We've talked before together about you maybe calling your dad and telling him what you think about this. What do you think would happen? You're just letting them kind of work it out and test it out in their mind. So open-ended questions and probes to see what the options are. The next is giving information. Again, this is where we get to the territory that's really different from the other stages because you will be a lot more direct. And as a helper, you are trained as an expert, and so you do have knowledge. an education that prepares you to understand different situations and what could be good there. As a grief counselor, I understand that it can be good to take time, take care of yourself, and take time to process. So someone's grieving, I have that expertise to share with them. Someone who's an addictions counselor is going to have a lot of expertise about different ways and habits to get in to avoid falling into addictive traps, like don't go to the bar, don't hang out with the friends that are doing the drugs that you used to do, that kind of thing. So it is okay to share your expertise at this stage, but it's still different from giving advice because you're not telling a client what to do, you're just sharing helpful, useful information that you have because you're a trained professional. You can also give your opinions here, and I'll give an example of that for a second, but be sure to kind of label it as an opinion and share cautiously. If you ever share an opinion about something a client is experiencing or doing, you want to be sure that it's not like advice, like they don't have to believe you or see it how you see it, or you're not going to work with them anymore. You know what I mean? You don't want them to feel like they have to buy into what you're saying or you're not going to keep working together. Another important thing, which you may connect to in this lecture right here, is don't give too much information at one time. You ever sit through a really boring online lecture from Professor Silvestro, and she's talking on for 20 minutes about 1,000 different topics, and your brain can't control it all? Imagine that you're going to a helper for something, and you're stressed and dealing with something, and the helper tells you 20 different things. You can't remember it. So try to chunk things out to people. You might have 1,000 bits of information that would be useful for your client, but parse it out. Give it time so that it has some ability to stick. So here are just some examples of what you could say for giving information. So in my training, we learn that deep breathing can be helpful for anxiety. So this person knows that deep breathing is helpful, they just share it. I'm not telling them what to do, just saying this is a thing I know. Another part of giving information is sometimes giving information of why you're doing what you're doing. So maybe you're asking a lot of open-ended questions and they don't really understand why you're doing it. In that case, you could say, I'm asking you to do this because, so I'm asking you to brainstorm your own ideas so that you can also feel ownership over your own change. This could be advice that someone gives someone about studying. Say you're a study expert. Having a quiet place to study may be beneficial in reaching your goal. And then the last one, this is an example of an opinion. So as a knowledgeable helper, you are going to have assessments and opinions about what clients need. You just want to share them tentatively. So someone could say, in my opinion, it sounds like you would benefit from pursuing personal hobbies for self-care. You stated that you like painting. Why not try that? So this is just an opinion. You're not saying you have to do this. You're just offering this up as an option. There you go. So here are some guidelines for giving information. You want to be aware of your motives and their motives as well. So first, are you educating the client, or by giving this info, are you just trying to push your agenda or show off? This is not a time where we want to show how smart we are. Anytime you give information, it just should be for the benefit of educating the client. Will sharing this information normalize the experience the client is describing? Because if you know information about this and you know about different situations that relate to what the client is talking about, it means that what they're going through is normal and other people have gone through it too, and there is information and solutions out there. Another thing to consider, this is when we're talking about explaining rationale. One type of giving information is explaining what you're doing in the helping process so that they can understand the purpose of it. Is that going to be helpful for the client, or is it going to make the waters too muddy? Sometimes I'll tell a client to breathe deeply, and I've had some people suddenly kind of freak out, like, why is she looking at my breathing? And I'll say, one thing that I've noticed and that I know in my training is that when people get upset or anxious or shaken up, that they stop breathing as well. So I encourage people to breathe so that they can, first of all, take care of themselves, get some oxygen to their brain, and it also can help you calm down. So that's why I'm doing this. But sometimes, obviously, not every client needs that explanation. And then another thing is, does the client need or want this information? Sometimes clients will just ask you about information, and sometimes it's them not wanting to do their own work, and maybe being too dependent on you. But sometimes it's okay. They just really want the information. So you kind of have to judge, is the client asking me to share my expertise because they don't want to think through this on their own, or is it just that they're at their wit's end and this would be really helpful for them? So these are different considerations. The next is giving feedback. So in the action stage, you're talking in your work together about coming up with options, but then ideally they're also practicing new things in their life. So they may come in and talk about the new things they're practicing. So we talk about Margarita, who is at work and she struggles with confidence. And so maybe you talk about tips for having confidence, and she goes to work and she tries to look people in the eye. But as she comes in and she tells you about looking people in the eye, she's looking down. You might want to point out, I can see that you're really trying. It seems like you're still struggling in here. Feedback can be really helpful when people are trying out new skills, right? That's why as a teacher, I give you feedback on your skills so I can give you a sense of how you might be doing. Feedback does involve your opinion, so try to keep it as professional sounding as you can. That's typo. Giving feedback is similar to immediacy. Remember we talked about immediacy, bringing immediacy to your therapeutic relationship. Giving feedback is similar, but it's only about the client. So let's look at examples to make this hopefully make a little more sense. So a client talks about sharing their thoughts with their dad, and they're really excited, and it went well, and they don't in any way indicate that anything was bad about it. It just sounds positive. You want to reaffirm that they tried something new. You could say, it sounds like you took a risk in sharing your thoughts with your dad, and it went well. You're reinforcing what they've done, and that can be really positive. We want to give positive and growing edge feedback. Maybe a client talks about, instead trying to talk to their dad about difficulties they have with them, but they didn't really tell the whole story. They were too afraid to really say how they were feeling, but they did try to have a conversation. You might give feedback like, it sounds like you tried to bring up how you were feeling, but you may have held back. It sounds like you may have needed to say a bit more to get the message across. Because if the client can actually share what's on their mind, the other person isn't going to know. So this is like positive, but you're kind of encouraging them to move along. This goes back to the example of Margarita. You might see that they're growing in a skill that they need to work on. Like maybe they are showing up as more confident, but there are still some pieces there. They're still not making as much eye contact. So you could say, you spoke with a lot more confidence today in session, but I feel like you're still acting out of some self-doubt. This isn't judgmental. It's just you're kind of helping to keep in touch with where they are, helping them kind of keep in touch with where they are. You're really assessing the situation together with feedback. And then lastly, if someone talks about, maybe talking to their mom and it just did not go as they planned, and they really aren't giving themselves credit, though, for having, trying something new and that was challenging. You could say, I can tell that you wish that had gone better, but it sounds like you did make some important changes that helped. So we can have really positive feedback, we can have growing edge feedback, we can have a mix of things. Sometimes people need to hear positive feedback and they aren't telling it to themselves, so feedback can just be helpful. And so we want to be direct with feedback, but supportive. So different things to consider in giving feedback. Could the client use some honest encouragement to keep going? We could all use encouragement, right? But it should be honest. So if clients are doing things well in the action stage, we want to give them feedback about that so they feel encouraged. Another thing is, sometimes we're afraid to give tough feedback, but what if we want to ask ourselves, will the client be harmed if I don't share this feedback? If they are trying new things out and they think they're doing really well, but they really aren't as far as they need to be to succeed, it can be helpful to kind of say, again, Margarita, I know you're really working on confidence and that has been really hard for you and I'm really proud of you, but I just still noticed that you're having a lot of problems with eye contact. Let's talk about that. I'm not yelling at her. I'm just bringing up the fact that it still seems like there's an issue there. The next is, are you sandwiching negative feedback with positive feedback? Clients are far more receptive to positive feedback, aren't we all? So it's very good. It's good to sandwich things, and these shouldn't be made up things. Think about genuine reasons to encourage clients as they're trying these new positive actions in their life, and then give them it's called negative, but I think of it as growing edge, because we all always have things that we could grow in, right? So you want to sandwich them so that they can take it, accept it, and not feel hopeless. And also, are you giving feedback about things that the client can change? Or are you giving them feedback about who they are fundamentally doesn't work? So, again, with the case of Margarita, you want to focus on her behaviors, the eye contact, the way she's showing up. You don't want to say, Margarita, it just sounds like you're never going to be confident. You don't want to make it about them. You want to make it about behaviors. Give feedback to their behaviors, not you're a hopeless mess, right? We don't want to label the person. We want to talk about the outside stuff there. Ugh, I don't know if I'm making sense. Process advisement. This is interesting. So process advisement really refers to helpers encouraging clients to practice new skills within a session. And so generally these are going to be social interactions. This could be tough conversations they need to have. Maybe it's preparing for a job interview. Maybe it's preparing to ask someone out on a date. You want to be careful about that. But different kinds of social interactions that it could be helpful for clients to practice in session. And this is nice because it's a type of guidance and you can be there to give direct feedback, to offer encouragement, but they're not just doing it suddenly on their own without you there. So different things you could do, let's role play your conversation with your boss. Your clients needs to have a tough conversation with the boss. They think they deserve a raise, or maybe there's a lot of terrible things happening in your work environment. There's harassment everywhere. Stressful conversation. Role play it with your helper. And then you have the practice, you can feel calmer about it. Your helper, as the helper, can give them feedback about things to say or not say, or see how it feels for them. Or you can get them to role play something that happened that they were stressed about. Say there's a mother and her daughter has a lot of meltdowns and fits, and she tries her best, but she gets so exhausted, and she keeps coming in and she's looking for ways to change her response. Maybe it could be helpful if you acted out. So show me how you acted when your daughter had a fit. And if the client can show that, it'll be easier for the counselor or helper or social worker or whatever. It'll be easier for them to give feedback if they kind of see what it sort of looks like rather than just talking about it. And this is an example of how to bring something like this up. But, would you be willing to try something new? What if I represented your negative thinking patterns of self-doubt? Would you be willing to speak to me the same way that you were trying to internally talk to yourself? So, we've talked about toxic thoughts. This can be, process advisement can be practicing interactions between people, but it can also represent interactions that we have with ourselves. So someone feels that they have to be a perfectionist. I, as the helper, might take the role of their need to be perfect, and they can speak to me. They can tell me how they're frustrated with me. They can tell me how I run their life, and it can just be empowering to do that outside of themselves, and it can help them be stronger when they're on their own and they need to talk to themselves in a more helpful way. So, next, direct guidance. This is making suggestions, giving directives, or providing advice. So you already know that I'm going to say we want to be really cautious with this skill, but there is a place for it. So when you give direct guidance to a client, again, it's coming from your professional expertise. It fits the client. It should fit the problem that they're having and really be rooted in your training and experience. So, an example of someone who's coming to get help and they're having a lot of nightmares and it causes them a lot of anxiety, it would be reasonable for the helper to give them advice to journal, right? So, Tisha, I think journaling about your nightmares could be helpful for you in making sense of things. Now, notice that tone is not bossy, it's not aggressive in any way, but it is giving a direct, hey, why don't you try this? I'm a professional, this is what I do, why don't you try this thing? And so the rationale is that, we know that advice can build dependency. Just telling clients what to do, especially when we haven't gotten to know them, it can be off, it can be not a good fit. So we want to give advice when we really know the client, we know their issue. But sometimes clients have exhausted their own sense of options. I know I've certainly been at places in my life where I've thought about problems that I have and different ways to attack it, and I just don't see that there are actually other choices out there. And sometimes it's because I'm emotionally overwhelmed and just kind of get sort of myopic and blinded. And sometimes it's just that I didn't know that there were other choices. So, professional helpers are trained to understand different types of options, and giving those options to people as a kind of advice giving can be helpful. You're not telling them what to do, but you're letting them know what possible roads are out there. Sometimes people just do need explicit guidance. I think a good example is, someone, I've worked with a lot of people who maybe struggle with anxiety or depression, and they do a lot of personal work and a lot of changes in their thinking and their patterns and behaviors, and they get a support system, but they still really can't get there. Sometimes those are clients that I will say, well, have you considered getting medicine for a while? You don't have to be on that medicine forever, but, antidepressants can be helpful for some people for a while. So, that's what this person is saying to this other person. John, have you ever considered seeing a psychiatrist for meds? I think it could be helpful for you. You're not telling them what to do, but they might not have considered it as an option. So obviously cautions here. Remember that clients still have the right to choose their own path, but you are also an expert that can give different thoughts. But know the limits of what you can offer, right? You can't help them with every problem in their life, no matter what type of training you have. I'm a counselor. I'm trained to help with a lot of things, but there are a lot of things I just can't help with. I don't know how to give advice about medical issues. I can't tell them what types of physical therapy to do. And another thing to know is that, you can't help everyone choose helpful things. Another part of your limits is that you can't make choices for people, and sometimes they're just not going to take the helpful options you want for them, and that is a part of it. And just, again, be very cautious with fostering dependence with clients. Giving a client different options and advice can be really great. It can be a lifesaver for some people, but sometimes they're just not doing their own work. So it's really up to your judgment to tell the difference. And this was a comic that I found amusing that doesn't totally relate. Just don't give advice, it's this bad. Don't do it. So, the last one, I believe, is skills for the action stage, disclosures of strategies. We've talked about disclosures before. Disclosures are sharing about your own experiences or generally the experiences of people you've worked with. So with the action stage, maybe that's a helper sharing tools that they've used in similar situations. And like I said, that can also include general strategies that other clients have found to be successful. But in disclosing strategies, we've talked about before when we were disclosing emotional experiences. Say a client lost their parent and you lost a parent and you talked about, yeah, I know that's hard. And then you immediately turn it back to the client. But with strategies, also consider if the strategy you're suggesting is feasible for the client. Maybe exercise is something that's really helped you. But if you have a client who's not able to be physical, don't share that you did that because they're just going to feel bad because that won't work for them. So just be thoughtful about that. Consider it. But here's an example about a strategy for anxiety. So the helper might say, when I used to struggle with higher levels of anxiety, I found that taking brief walks throughout the day really helped me out. I found it useful to be alone with my thoughts for a while and to get up and move. It relaxed me and I felt more prepared to handle whatever I was dealing with. So that's just a quick option for a way to deal with anxiety that the helper can throw out to the client to take or not. A last one, say a client is talking about being depressed and they go into isolation, and say you've had other clients that deal with something like that. You could say, I've had several other clients that have shared feeling like they get depressed, and before they know it, they're feeling like they're isolating. A few of them had mentioned having accountability people in their life, people they can call when they start to get down. They've shared that this helps them from going into isolation. So hopefully that's kind of straightforward, but you want to just use this as another tool for showing clients different options that they might have. So that is the end of this lecture. I rushed through it. Be sure to read very carefully. Other things, I am actually going to reschedule the final quiz for next week. I think allowing you to really soak in this material a little bit would be helpful, and space out your work between submitting your final project. So that is the end. Enjoy. Also, I posted the journal, and the journal can be due this week or next week. It's optional to you. Just remember that I'm rescheduling the quiz for next week, so that could come into your thinking. But it'll be a good one. Take care. I hope you had a great holidays. Bye, you guys.